The latest revelation from Seoul's intelligence agency shows North Korea may have reached the stage where it's capable of carrying out another nuclear test at any given time. During the National Assembly audit on Thursday, the National Intelligence Service said that there is a chance that Pyongyang is getting ready for another nuclear test at Tunnel 3 of its Punggye-ri test site. It also said that the North is pressing ahead with its missile program, citing satellite images of vehicles going in and out of a missile research facility in Pyongyang. It added that the regime could begin reprocessing spent fuel rods at its Yongbyon nuclear complex by late this year. In another statement, the NIS claimed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is raising surveillance on top officials and that the regime appears to have resumed holding public executions to tighten ideological control. The NIS also said that the North could develop its hacking system by making use of virtual money and try to cause societal chaos by attacking South Korea's finance system, as attempts to hack Seoul's financial institutions have been discovered. Regarding the whereabouts of Kim Han-sol, the son of Kim Jong-un's deceased half-brother Kim Jong-nam, the NIS said that Kim is not in China, and though the details of where Kim is residing at the moment cannot be revealed, he's well protected. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Using political and diplomatic ways to solve the tensions on the Korean Peninsula is the best way. It is in line with what the world expects. We encourage related parties to take efforts towards dialogue and connection. China is willing to work with South Korea to strengthen communication and coordination and get back to the track of dialogue and negotiation as soon as possible.
Several U.S. officials have reportedly told CNN that North Korea is currently enhancing its KN-20 ICBM to improve its nuclear and missile capabilities. According to the officials, the new improvements are forcing the U.S. to recalculate the timing of the North Korean threat and necessitating continuous updates to its military response options. They added that Pyongyang is also upgrading its nuclear fuel, missile launchers, guidance, and targeting system. This comes as President Donald Trump is scheduled to begin his first Asia tour next week, where the regime's threats will be a major topic of discussion. Washington believes that the regime could take the critical step of mounting a miniaturized warhead on top of an ICBM next year. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, testified to Congress that North Korea poses the greatest threat to America. During Defense Secretary James Mattis's visit to Seoul last week, he acknowledged that North Korea has accelerated the threat that it poses to its neighbors and the world through its illegal and unnecessary missile and nuclear weapons programs. Meanwhile, on Thursday, South Korea's Air Force testified that the domestically produced mid-range surface-to-air missile, the Jong-Un, and scored a direct hit on an airborne target 40 kilometers away. This was the first test of the Jong-Un since it was added to the Air Force's arsenal earlier this year. The Jong-Un is a surface-to-air missile that was developed to take down airborne targets, such as enemy airplanes and fighter jets. The Air Force is looking into developing an upgraded version of the Jong-Un that can intercept incoming ballistic missiles.
The leaders of China and North Korea have exchanged friendly messages regarding Xi Jinping's recent re-election. It is significant as ties between that two had grown frosty in recent months due to North Korea's repeated provocations. But as our Kim Mo-kyun tells us, that's about to change as Beijing is mulling over its options to send one of its officials to Pyongyang.
On Thursday, North Korean state media reported that Chinese President Xi Jinping has replied to the message North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sent to congratulate the Chinese leader for securing a second five-year term. The North Korean Central News Agency reported that in a message sent by Xi on Wednesday, the Chinese leader expressed hope that relations between the two countries can ultimately make a positive contribution to regional stability. This marks the first time in over a year that President Xi has sent a personal message to the North Korean leader. Political experts say this news could imply a softening of the two countries' relations, which have worsened amid North Korea's continuous missile and nuclear provocations.
We can't come to a conclusion that North Korea-China relations are getting better, but with U.S. President Trump urging China to cooperate in solving the North Korean issue, we can say that China is willing to do more in taking a decisive role.
After the news broke out, South Korea's Unification Ministry said that there is a possibility that a Chinese government official could visit North Korea as the Chinese Communist Party's 19th Congress just ended. Speaking to reporters on Thursday, a senior ministry official raised the possibility, saying that China had previously sent an official to the north following the CCP's 18th Congress 5 years ago. The official stressed that since the end of this year's Congress, China has been clearly making efforts to improve ties with South Korea, but added that it is still unclear how Asia's largest economy would deal with North Korea.
White House National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster told reporters Thursday that President Trump will call on all countries to further pressure North Korea into giving up its nuclear weapons. He added that the president will remind friends and foes alike that the U.S. stands ready to defend itself if needed, using its full range of capabilities.
What the president has done is clarified in all of his discussions, his statements on North Korea, our determination to ensure that North Korea is unable to threaten our allies and our partners and certainly the United States.
In an interview with YTN, McMaster said Trump will solidify his stance on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula during his visit, and is expected to warn Pyongyang that any attack will be countered by Seoul and Washington. He added that the U.S. will consult with South Korea before taking any military action against the North.
We are, as you know, completely intertwined in our command structure. We're sharing information, intelligence every day. It's hard to imagine any scenario where a threat could manifest itself.
The most critical stop in President Trump's week-long trip to Asia will be in China, where he is expected to press his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to tighten the screws on North Korea. President Xi may be asked to further reduce China's oil shipments to North Korea and to slap restrictions on coal imports and financial transactions with the regime. President Trump leaves on Friday for his tour of South Korea, China, Japan, Vietnam, and the Philippines, the longest visit to Asia by any American president in more than 25 years.
Decision. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Brett. And the congressional deadline is in less than 6 hours. Sources say the State Department will miss that. Officials say they want to keep a possible designation as an option heading into negotiations next week between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. At the White House this afternoon, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster offered a case to designate North Korea.
A regime who murders someone in a public airport using nerve agent and a despotic leader who murders his brother in that manner. I mean, that's clearly an act of terrorism that fits in with a range of other
nerve agent,
actions.
a despotic leader, someone who murders his brother in public, building the case essentially that North Korea is a state sponsor of terrorism, though that has fallen short, at least here right now, of the official designation. The State Department says it's determining whether North Korea meets the legal definition of a state sponsor of terrorism. It's essentially that it has repeatedly supported acts of international terrorism. So if so, U.S. law then would automatically implement additional sanctions against North Korea. Now, while there are concerns about escalating an already tense situation between the United States and North Korea, there is strong bipartisan congressional push for Secretary Tillerson to relist North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism.
They were designated that way in 2008. It was changed, but it was changed because we were willing to remove that designation in exchange for them making certain commitments on their nuclear program that they did not keep.
Defense and state and vice president will skip a trip to the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. According to that official, those visits are just becoming cliched.
In less than 5 days, U.S. President Donald Trump will land in South Korea, the second stop on his Asia tour. While here, he and President Moon will have to thrash out some tough issues, not least the burden of South Korea's defense and bilateral trade. And a final answer from the White House, President Trump will not be visiting the DMZ. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump will not visit the demilitarized zone after all, and consequently, he'll be breaking with a tradition followed by every U.S. president since Ronald Reagan, minus the elder George Bush, who did go to the DMZ. A White House official told reporters Trump skipping the DMZ due to time constraints, but also called the standard DMZ visits a little bit of a cliché. Many had expected Trump might go as a projection of strength amid escalating tension between Washington and Pyongyang following 11 missile and nuclear provocations since President Moon took office in May. The White House official also confirmed that President Trump will go to Camp Humphreys instead, an American military base about 60 kilometers south of Seoul, which President Moon Jae-in recommended that Trump visit. The official said it made sense for the president to see the base, not only because he would have a chance to address U.S. troops and their families, but also to highlight South Korea's role in sharing the burden of the alliance. President Trump has been arguing that South Korea is not paying enough for the presence of U.S. forces. But as a matter of fact, the total cost of the installation of Camp Humphreys was more than $14 billion, with Seoul shouldering more than half of the total cost. An official at Cheongwade had expressed hopes before that Trump's visiting the base in Pyeongtaek would lead him to realize how much South Korea was doing for its ally. Another hurdle that both presidents will be looking at is the Korea-US FTA. The Trump administration has continued to demand a renegotiation to address its growing trade deficit with South Korea in goods, even floating the idea of a complete withdrawal from the agreement. Seoul confirmed the two countries have entered into negotiations and are considering all possibilities. So while the two leaders will definitely be discussing how Seoul and Washington will approach Pyongyang and its future provocations, there are growing concerns that thorny issues could put pressure on the two countries' long-standing alliance.
Because we enjoyed this kind of very, very high mutual trust. So far it has a very smooth and successful cooperation in the Euro-Asia Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative. Not only on the political level, both two countries, especially the leaders, they signed a joint statement to show a very, very high political trust from each other. And also at the same time, there are already some, I think, very, very big projects, like you mentioned before. I think it's also give a very, very strong support to this kind of synergy between the different, maybe from both two sides, from between those two strategic development.
On the other hand, there's another test between the two countries, that is the issue of the DPRK nuclear issue. Mr. Barbish, now the crisis is going ever to more intensity as we speak, and certainly the U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to China is to even pressure China even more about that issue. How is China and Russia in the right way coordinate with one another before that trip and also for the way forward? Mr. Barbish.
Well, if you look at the latest statements, Russia and China basically look eye to eye on the North Korean nuclear problem. We joined the United Nations Security Council sanctions against North Korea, despite our history of close ties to this country, simply because Russia and China are responsible neighbors of North Korea. Mr. Trump can talk about fire, fury, wars, destruction. For Russia and for China, a war on the Korean Peninsula is simply not an option. This is unacceptable. So what Russia and China are trying to do is we're going to fight against nuclear proliferation. We're going to put pressure on the North Korean regime, but we simply exclude the option of war. You know, Mr. Obama liked to use this phrase, I keep all the options on the table. Well, if you rightly understand his language, it was actually a threat of war. Let me remind you that a threat of war is prohibited by the UN Charter. The UN Charter not only prohibits wars, it prohibits also the threat of war. So I think that Russia and China see eye to eye on the North Korean problem. Now we can set this problem right, I think, by common efforts, but you can only do it together. Russia, China, the United States, Japan, South Korea, But we should all unite on the platform that war is not an option in Korea.
War is not an option, and yet how is that likely to be prevented? And also, nuclear threat is a big danger too. It is even more probably than a quote-unquote a conflict at small scale. Mr. Cui, what do you think is China's option? Working with Russia, what can China achieve? Meanwhile, will Russia be able to put pressure more on DPRK and not let China to act alone in that regard?
Yeah, also, you know, the attitude or stance of China on this DPRK nuclear issue is so as clear as possible. Firstly, non-nuclearization in the peninsula. Secondly, must be in a peaceful solution. So I think that once every stakeholders, including Russia, United States, Japan, some other, once they follow these two principles, I think every stakeholder could be a partner of China to deal with this any kind of challenges from nuclear issue in Korea Peninsula.
I did not hear very clearly as to how China and Russia could cooperate, besides of the fact that the two do not agree there should be any armed conflict, not even, of course, the war that should be happening in this region. Mr. Barbish, can you be more specific? What kind of cooperation can these two countries have, as specific as possible?
I can. Well, first, a dialogue should restart between South Korea and North Korea, between the United States and North Korea. Actually, it is Washington that refuses to have negotiations. It's not Pyongyang. Pyongyang says, talk to us. Washington, in response, says that you are not worthy of talking to us.
Okay.
You are a pariah nation. You are a rogue nation. So this kind of language should stop. Whatever we think about the North Korean leadership, I think China and Russia were not very enthusiastic. We rejected the model that exists in Pyongyang right now. But it doesn't mean that you can't talk to Pyongyang, especially when such issues as nuclear security are at stake. If you talk to the North Korean regime, then you can explain to them what kind of pressure Russia and China are prepared to exert on North Korea if it continues down the dangerous path. And we can explain to them what kind of benefits they can get if they scale down their nuclear program and if they start to cooperate. If Russia and China see eye to eye, if we agree on joint plan of action, I'm sure that sooner or later the United States and Japan will join us in our joint efforts at bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula.
I see.